Sometimes the hardest thing about losing someone isn't the grief, it's learning how to live alone. 54-year-old Calla Vrenn knows this better than most, having spent 6 winters in a Dakota mountain cabin built for 2, but occupied by 1. She's made peace with solitude, or so she tells herself. Then one frozen morning, she finds a dying stranger in the snow. His name is Judd Carroway, and he's been beaten nearly to death. She brings him inside and saves his life. The next morning, 200 desperate settlers arrive at her door. They're running from something, and they believe Calla can protect them. What could force a woman who chose isolation to suddenly lead 200 strangers through a Dakota winter? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat at the edge of where civilization gave up trying. Calla Vrenn had chosen this spot deliberately, high enough that the valley traders respected the climb, remote enough that curious neighbors didn't exist. The structure itself was modest, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, a stone chimney that drew clean, a roof that had weathered 6 hard winters without complaint. Inside, everything spoke of function over comfort. A narrow bed, a table built for 2 that now served 1. Shelves lined with preserves she'd put up each autumn, their glass catching whatever light made it through the single window. The central beam that supported the roof bore carved letters, H, V, and C. V 1867. Henry had insisted on marking it the day they'd raised the frame. "So folks know we built this together," he'd said, his hands still scraped raw from the work. Calla could still see him standing there, grinning despite the exhaustion, despite how the altitude made every task twice as hard. They'd been 48 then, both of them, deciding to start over after leading a wagon. Train West had left them worn down by other people's needs and complaints. This was supposed to be their reward, a place where nobody asked them for anything. Henry had lasted 1 winter. Pneumonia took him in February of 1868, came on fast and mean. Calla had tried everything, mustard plasters, steam tents, every remedy she'd learned from 30 years of frontier living. Nothing worked. He died on a Tuesday afternoon while snow fell silent outside. His last words, an apology for leaving her alone. She'd buried him on the south slope where he'd wanted to plant apple trees come spring, wrapped in the good quilt his mother had made, the frozen ground fighting her every inch down. The traders found her that March, near starved and half-mad with grief. They'd hauled supplies up the mountain, tried to convince her to come down to the valley settlement. She'd refused. Told them she'd manage fine, thank you, and she'd appreciate it if they'd leave her be except for twice-yearly supply. Runs. They'd agreed, probably figuring she wouldn't last another season alone. That was 6 years ago. Calla had not only lasted, she'd become something the valley people whispered about with a mixture of respect and unease. The mountain woman. The widow who preferred pine silence to human company. They left supplies at a designated spot halfway up the trail. Flour, salt, ammunition, the occasional newspaper she never asked for, and she left payment in a locked box. Coin or furs, depending on what she had. The arrangement worked because nobody had to talk, nobody had to explain themselves, nobody had to pretend they cared about anyone else's day. Her daily routine had calcified into ritual. Wake at dawn, check the trapline, tend the small garden plot she'd expanded each year, now big enough to keep her in vegetables through the cold months. Hunt when the meat supply ran low, preserve what she could, repair what broke. Read Henry's books in the evening, by lamplight. He'd been fond of history, and she'd worked her way through his small collection twice over. Sleep, repeat. The solitude had changed her in ways she recognized but didn't examine too closely. Her voice had grown rough from disuse. Whole days passed where she spoke only to the occasional deer or the pair of ravens that nested in the big pine near the cabin. Her hands had become more scarred, more capable. She could dress an elk alone now, something that would have taken her and Henry together before. Could split enough wood in an afternoon to last a week. could read weather in the sky with accuracy that would have made the old trail scouts nod approval. But the silence had also preserved her grief like something pickled in brine. Every object in the cabin carried Henry's touch. The table where he'd carved their initials, the shelf he'd built slightly crooked, insisting it gave the place character. The bed where he'd died, which she still slept in because moving to the floor seemed like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. She was, she understood dimly, stuck, not living so much as maintaining, going through the motions of survival without any particular interest in what came next. The mountain had become both sanctuary and prison, and she'd long since stopped trying to figure out which mattered more. Winter in the Dakota highlands meant something different than winter in the valleys. It came earlier, stayed later, and carried a weight that flatlanders couldn't quite grasp. By late October, snow had already begun its serious accumulation, drifts built against the cabin's north wall. The creek froze solid, except for one small section where the current ran fast enough to resist. Calla had learned to read these patterns, to know when the next storm was coming by the way the light changed, by how the ravens behaved, by a dozen small signs Henry had taught her. This particular morning, the morning that would change everything, had started like any other. She'd woken before sunrise, fed the fire, made coffee from grounds she'd already used twice. Breakfast was johnny cakes fried in bear grease, eaten standing by the window while she watched the sky lighten. Clear, she'd noted. Good day to check the far trapline, the one that ran along the ridge toward the eastern slope. She'd dressed in layers, wool against skin, buckskin over that, and Henry's old coat on top, because it was warmer than hers, and she'd stopped caring about sentiment. Her rifle, a .44-40 Winchester that had belonged to her father, went over her shoulder. Knife at her belt. Small pack with basic supplies in case weather turned. The walk to the trapline took 2 hours, following a trail she knew by heart. Fresh snow from 2 nights ago had smoothed everything into clean lines, rabbit tracks here. Elk had passed through overnight, a small herd moving downslope. She checked each trap methodically, 2 rabbits, 1 marten, all dispatched and reset with practiced efficiency. The marten pelt would bring good money from the traders. Rabbit would be stew. She was on her way back, mind empty in the way that long walks allowed, when she saw the ravens circling. 3 of them, riding thermals above a spot maybe 1/4 mile off the main trail. Calla stopped, watched their pattern. They weren't hunting. They were waiting. Something was down there, something either dead or close enough that patience would pay off. She should have kept walking. Whatever it was, injured deer, dead elk, somebody's lost dog, wasn't her concern. The smart thing was to head home, dress the rabbits, get the marten pelt stretched before the flesh side dried wrong. But 6 years of solitude hadn't quite killed the part of her that needed to know. She found him in a small clearing, face down in snow, already stained dark with blood. A man, she realized as she approached carefully, rifle ready. Tall, maybe 50, dressed in worn travel clothes that had seen hard use. His hat lay a few feet away. One boot was missing. The snow around him told a story. He'd been beaten severely, had crawled this far, and then stopped moving. Calla stood 10 feet back, watching for the rise and fall of breath. There, shallow but present. "Mister," she called. No response. She moved closer, used her boot to turn him slightly. His face was a mess, split lip, one eye swollen shut, nose definitely broken. Bruising that went deep, the kind that meant internal damage. Knife wounds on his side, soaking through his shirt. Whoever had done this had meant to kill him, and they'd nearly succeeded. The smart thing was to walk away. This man was dying, and getting involved in whatever trouble he carried would only bring that trouble to her door. She had no obligation to strangers, had spent 6 years specifically avoiding any obligation to anyone. But as she stood there, wind cutting through the clearing, she saw something she recognized, pinned to the inside of his coat, visible where the fabric had torn, a military sigil. Cavalry. From the look of it, though the design was worn enough she couldn't place the unit. Henry had been cavalry before they'd married, had kept his own insignia in a box she still had somewhere in the cabin. "Damn it," she said quietly. She couldn't leave him, couldn't walk away from a man who'd served, not when Henry would have expected her to do better. It was a thin thread of obligation, but it was enough to tip the scale. Getting him to the cabin took 3 hours she couldn't really spare. She fashioned a travois from pine branches and rope she kept in her pack, got him onto it despite his dead weight, and hauled him back along the trail. He regained consciousness once, mumbled something about "they're coming," and told them, then passed out again. Calla didn't like the sound of that, but kept moving. By the time she got him inside and onto the bed, her bed, the only bed full dark, had fallen. She built up the fire, heated water, and set to work with the calm efficiency of someone who'd patched up plenty of injuries over the years. Trail life taught you emergency medicine, whether you wanted to learn or not. The knife wounds were serious but not fatal if she could prevent infection. She cleaned them with whiskey that made him jerk and moan even unconscious, packed them with clean cloth, and bound them tight. The beating worried her more. He could have internal bleeding she couldn't see, couldn't fix. All she could do was keep him warm and hope his body was strong enough to recover. She worked through the night, checking his breathing, changing compresses, forcing water between his cracked lips when she could. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, his fever spiked. She stripped him down and packed him with snow wrapped in cloth, an old trick that either worked or didn't, and you found out which when the person either lived or died. He lived. By dawn, his fever had broken. His breathing had evened out. Color was returning to his face, beneath the bruising. He'd probably wake within a few hours, probably survive if infection didn't set in. Calla allowed herself to feel tired then. She sat in Henry's chair. She still thought of it as his, though he'd been gone longer than they'd lived here together, and watched this stranger breathe in her bed. She'd broken her isolation for him, had brought trouble of unknown size right into her home, and she couldn't quite explain why, except that leaving him seemed worse than the alternative. The morning light grew stronger, filling the cabin with the pale glow of winter sun on snow. Calla thought about making coffee, thought about checking the trapline she'd neglected yesterday, thought about a dozen small tasks that needed doing. Then she heard it. Faint at first, then growing clearer. Voices, multiple voices, and the creak of wagon wheels. She moved to the window, looked down the trail toward the valley. What she saw made no sense at all. Wagons, dozens of them, maybe more, strung out along the lower trail and climbing toward her cabin. People walking alongside, children visible in wagon beds, horses straining against the grade. She counted quickly, lost track, counted again. 50 wagons at least, maybe more still out of sight below. "What in hell?" she whispered. They were coming here, to her cabin, to the place she'd spent 6 years making sure nobody visited. 200 people, give or take, 200 strangers. And they were arriving at her door, like she'd invited them, like she'd promised them something. Calla looked back at the unconscious man in her bed, then at the approaching caravan. Whatever trouble he'd brought her, it was bigger than she'd imagined. And it was already here. Calla grabbed her rifle and stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. The cold hit immediate and sharp, but she barely noticed. Her attention fixed on the impossible scene, unfolding below a ragged column of humanity, climbing toward her sanctuary, destroying 6 years of careful isolation with every step. The lead wagon crested the final rise 20 minutes later, pulled by a pair of exhausted horses that looked like they'd been pushed too hard for too long. The driver, a lean man, maybe 40, with a weathered face and tired eyes, pulled the team to a halt 30 feet from her cabin. He raised both hands, showing them empty. "Ma'am," he called. "We mean no trouble. We're looking for Calla Vrenn." "You found her," Calla said, rifle not quite pointed at him, but not quite pointed away either. "Now explain what the hell you're doing on my property." More wagons arrived, pulling into whatever flat space they could find. People climbed down, stiff from cold and travel. Calla saw families, elderly folks, children wrapped in thin blankets that wouldn't do much good against a Dakota winter. They looked exhausted. More than that, they looked desperate. The lean man climbed down from his wagon, moved a few steps closer, but stopped. When Calla's rifle shifted slightly, smart enough to read warning signs at least. "Name's Owen Birch," he said. "We came because Judd Carroway sent us. He said you could help. Said you were the only one who could." Judd Carroway. Calla kept her voice flat. "That the man currently bleeding in my bed." Owen's expression shifted to relief. "He made it then, thank God. We found him 2 days ago, beaten near to death on the trail behind us. He'd gone ahead, as our scout, was supposed to find us safe passage east. When he came back like that, we thought—" He stopped, seemed to gather himself. "He told us to find the mountain woman, gave us directions to this cabin, said if anyone could help us survive what's coming, it was you." "I don't help people," Calla said. "I don't know you, don't know your trouble, and I sure as hell don't remember inviting 200 strangers to my mountain." "It's closer to 210, Owen said quietly, counting the children. Behind him, the wagons kept arriving. The flat area around Calla's cabin, the small clearing she'd valued for its privacy, was rapidly filling with desperate people and their failing wagons. A woman was crying somewhere. A child called for his mother. An old man coughed, deep and wet. "You need to turn around," Calla said. "Right now. Head back down before the weather turns." "Can't do that." Owen's voice carried resignation rather than defiance. "There's men coming behind us, dangerous men. If we go back down, they'll find us on open ground. Up here, at least we've got elevation, defensible positions. Not my problem. Mom, I understand." "You don't understand anything." Calla's grip tightened on the rifle. "I live alone because I choose to. I don't lead wagon trains anymore. I don't take responsibility for other people's choices. Whatever trouble you're running from, it's yours to deal with." Owen studied her for a long moment. "Judd said you'd say that. Said you'd been hurt. Said you'd built walls. But he also said when it mattered, you'd be the one to stand. He knew your husband, ma'am. Served with Henry Vrenn in the cavalry back in '64. The name hit like a fist. Calla's expression didn't change, but something inside her went very still. "Henry's been dead 6 years, she said. "I know," Judd told us. "He also said Henry was the finest man he'd ever served with, and that you were the strongest leader he'd ever seen. That's why he sent us here. Not because he thought you'd want to help, because he knew you could." Calla wanted to shoot something, wanted to order them all off her mountain immediately. Wanted to march back inside, bar the door, and let them figure out their own problems. But Henry's name hung in the cold air between them, and with it came memories she'd worked hard to bury. "I need to talk to Carroway," she said finally. "Get your people settled, but not too settled. You're not staying." She turned and went back inside before Owen could respond, shutting the door firmly and dropping the bar. Through the window, she watched the settlers begin the process of making camp, unhitching horses, building fires, trying to organize chaos into something manageable. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd been traveling hard and knew how to make do with little. Inside the cabin, Judd Carroway remained unconscious, but his color looked better. Calla pulled Henry's chair close to the bed and sat, rifle across her lap. "You better have a damn good explanation," she said to the sleeping man, "and it better be worth breaking everything I've built here." An hour passed, then another. Outside, the settler camp took shape. Calla counted fires, 37 of them, scattered across her clearing and down the near slope. Too many people in too small a space, but they were managing. She had to give them that much. Near midday, Judd's eyes opened. He stared at the ceiling for several seconds, orienting himself, then turned his head slowly and found Calla watching him. You look angry, he said, voice rough as gravel. 200 people just showed up at my door because you sent them, Calla said. Angry doesn't begin to cover it. Judd tried to sit up, managed about 3 inches before pain stopped him. He settled back with a grimace. Had to. They wouldn't have survived otherwise. Not my concern. Should be. He coughed, winced. They're good people. Families. Got swindled by a land agent out of Wyoming territory, man named Taggart. He sold them parcels that didn't exist, took their savings, and when they figured out the fraud, his hired guns made it clear they weren't welcome to complain. Still not my concern. They tried heading east, toward real settlements. Taggart's men followed, harassing them, stealing supplies, roughing up anyone who protested. Judd's good eye fixed on her. I signed on as their scout 2 weeks ago, figured I could find them safe passage through the territories. Then Taggart's men caught me alone, decided to make an example. And you told them about me? I did. No apology in his voice. Told them there was a woman in the Dakota highlands who knew how to survive, who'd led wagon trains before, who could help them if anyone could. Calla stood abruptly, paced to the window. You had no right. I had every right. Henry gave it to me. She turned. What? Judd reached slowly inside his shirt, the clean one Calla had dressed him in after treating his wounds, and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. He held it toward her. Read it. Calla took the paper, unfolded it carefully. Henry's handwriting, unmistakable even after 6 years, dated March 1868, a month after his death. No, she realized. A month before. He'd written this while sick, while dying, probably while she was out checking traps or gathering firewood. Asterisk, Judd, asterisk, asterisk. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and Calla's alone. I'm asking you, as a favor, to a dead friend, to check on her if you can. She's strong as iron, but grief does things to people. If she's holed up in that cabin pretending she doesn't need anybody, she's lying to herself. Asterisk, asterisk. She was the best wagon leader I ever saw. Kept 30 families alive across 2,000 miles when half the other trains that season didn't make it. She's got a gift for seeing what needs doing and making it happen. But after we settled here, after I got sick, I could see her blaming herself. Like my dying was somehow her failing as a leader. Asterisk, asterisk, it wasn't. It was just bad luck and bad lungs and high altitude, but she won't see it that way. Asterisk, asterisk. If you ever need someone who can lead, someone who can make hard choices and live with them, find Calla. She'll say no. She'll mean it when she says it. But deep down, she needs purpose, like other people need air. Being alone isn't healing her. It's just preserving the hurt. Asterisk, asterisk. Do me one last favor, friend. Give her a reason to come back. Asterisk, asterisk, Henry. Vrenn times Calla read it twice. Her hands didn't shake, but that took effort. When she looked up, Judd was watching her with something like sympathy. He knew you'd hate me for this, Judd said. But he also knew you'd do what needed doing once you understood the stakes. The stakes, Calla repeated, voice hollow. You mean 200 strangers I don't know, running from trouble they brought on themselves. I mean 200 people who'll die if they don't get help. Children, ma'am. Families. Old folks who spent everything they had on Taggart's lies. Judd shifted, pain crossing his face. And I mean you, sitting up here for 6 years, telling yourself you're fine when anyone with eyes can see you're just waiting to die. Get out. The words came quiet, but sharp. Can't. You saved my life. I'm in your debt now, and I plan to pay it by making sure these people survive, whether you help or not. Calla moved to the door, yanked it open. Cold air rushed in. Then do it somewhere else. There is nowhere else. Taggart's men are maybe 2 days behind. These people need defensible ground, and someone who knows how to organize a defense. That's here, and that's you. I don't lead anymore. Then people will die, children will die, and you'll live with that. Same as you've been living with Henry's death alone and bitter and wasted. Calla wanted to throw him out, wanted to throw them all out, send them stumbling back down the mountain to face whatever consequences they'd earned. But Henry's letter felt like weight in her pocket, and outside she could see families huddled around inadequate fires, children shivering, old folks who wouldn't survive a hard freeze. "How long before they get here?" she asked finally. "Taggart's men. Day and a half if they push. 2 days if they don't." "How many?" 15 that I counted. Could be more by now. Calla did the math. 200 settlers, mostly families, versus 15 armed men who knew how to hurt people. Not impossible odds, but not good ones either. Especially if Taggart's crew had any tactical sense. 3 days, she said. "I'll give you 3 days to rest and heal. Then you take these people and find somewhere else to go. And if Taggart's men arrive before 3 days, then you'd better hope you can fight, because I'm not doing it for you." She walked out into the cold before Judd could respond, pulling the door shut hard enough to rattle the frame. The settlers watched her approach, conversations dying as she moved through their camp. She could feel their hope, their desperate need for someone to tell them everything would be fine. She wasn't that person. Hadn't been for 6 years, wasn't about to become it again just because some dying man had sent them to her door. But as she walked the perimeter of their camp, counting wagons and assessing supplies, some old instinct woke up despite her resistance. These people were in trouble, real trouble. And whether she wanted the responsibility or not, they were here now, on her mountain, looking to her for answers she'd stopped giving a long time ago. Owen Birch found her an hour later, standing at the eastern edge of the clearing where she could see down the trail they'd climbed. He approached carefully, respecting her space but determined to talk. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for letting us stay, even if it's just for a few days." "Didn't say you could stay," Calla replied without looking at him. "Said I'd give Carroway time to heal. Big difference." "Understood." Owen moved up beside her, followed her gaze down the mountain. "Still, it's more than we had an hour ago." Calla finally turned to face him. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd first thought, maybe 45, with deep lines around his eyes and the kind of weariness that came from carrying other people's burdens. A leader himself, she recognized. Someone who'd been elected or volunteered to speak for the group, make the hard decisions, take the blame when things went wrong. "Tell me about Taggart," she said. Owen's expression darkened. "Marcus Taggart. Land agent out of Cheyenne, or that's what he called himself. Showed up in our settlement last spring with papers, maps, official-looking documents. Said he had parcels available in Wyoming territory, good farmland, water rights, everything proper and legal. 200 acres per family, price that seemed fair. Let me guess you paid up front. Most of us paid everything we had. Life savings, money from selling our old places back east, everything." Owen's voice carried the weight of that mistake. "We traveled out in June, full of hope. Found the parcels he'd sold us were either already claimed by others, or were on Shoshone Treaty land, or didn't exist at all. Just empty prairie with no legal claim possible. And when you complained, Taggart had men waiting, told us the deals were final, no refunds, and if we made trouble we'd regret it. A few. Families tried to file complaints with the territorial marshal. Those families had accidents, barn fires, spooked horses. A man named Peterson, who pushed hardest, got beaten so bad he still can't walk right." Calla watched a young couple near one of the fires, a woman, maybe 25, holding a baby while her husband tried to rig a better shelter from a worn canvas tarp. They looked like they'd been pretty once, prosperous. Now they just looked scared. "So you ran," she said. "We organized, pooled what resources we had left, bought wagons and supplies, and headed east. Figured we'd try to make it to the Missouri, find legitimate settlement opportunities, start over." Owen's jaw tightened. Taggart's men followed. "Not to drive us off, to make sure we couldn't tell anyone what happened. They want us gone, ma'am, permanently." "Why not go to the army? Fort Laramie's not that far." We tried. Taggart's got a deputy marshal's badge, probably bought it, but it looks real enough. When we approached Fort Laramie, one of his men was there ahead of us, told the commander we were squatters and troublemakers. They wouldn't even let us file a complaint. Calla processed this. Corruption wasn't unusual on the frontier, but this level of organization suggested Taggart wasn't just a two-bit swindler. He was running a real operation, and he had enough reach to make problems disappear. How'd you end up with Carroway? Found him in a trading post 3 weeks ago. He was drifting, looking for scout work. We hired him to find a safe passage east, away from Taggart's reach. Owen glanced back toward the cabin where Judd lay recovering. He did good work. Found us routes that avoided settlements where Taggart might have people watching, kept us moving, kept us safe. Then, 5 days ago, he went ahead to scout the next section of trail. Came back beaten near to death, told us about you, and passed out. We've been pushing hard ever since to get here before Taggart's men caught up. And now you're trapped on a mountain with one way down and 15 armed men coming up it. Yes, ma'am. Calla walked away from the overlook, back toward the cabin. Owen followed. She was aware of other settlers watching, trying to gauge whether she'd help or send them away. The weight of their hope felt familiar and unwelcome. At the cabin, she pushed the door open. Judd was awake, propped against the wall, looking pale but alert. He watched her enter with something like wariness. "We need to talk," Calla said. "Figured we would." She pulled out a leather satchel from under the bed, Henry's old dispatch case, kept out of habit, and spread a worn map across the table. Owen crowded in to look. The map showed the Dakota highlands, the valleys below, terrain features marked in Henry's neat hand. "You said Taggart's men are a day and a half behind," Calla said to Judd. "What's their likely approach?" Judd studied the map, traced a line with one finger. "They'll follow our trail. It's the only route that makes sense for wagons. They'll probably push hard, try to catch us while we're still disorganized." 15 men, Calla said. "How well armed?" "Rifles, sidearms, a few shotguns. They're not military, but they know how to fight. Taggart hires men who've done this kind of work before." Calla traced different lines on the map, thinking through terrain and possibilities. Part of her brain, the part that had kept 30 families alive across a hostile frontier, was already working the problem despite her resistance. "If they come up the main trail, there's 3 places they'll be vulnerable," she said, pointing. "Here, where it narrows through that rock gap. Here, where the creek forces them close to the north slope. And here, about a mile below the cabin, where they'll have to take switchbacks." "You're thinking ambush," Owen said. "I'm thinking hypothetically." Calla straightened. "But I'm not your leader, and I'm not planning your defense. I'm just pointing out that if someone were inclined to defend this position, those would be the places to do it." Judd made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "You're already thinking like a leader, whether you admit it or not." "I'm thinking like someone who doesn't want a gunfight on her property," Calla corrected. "There's a difference." Owen pulled a worn ledger from his coat pocket, set it on the table next to the map. The leather cover was stained and cracked, pages yellowed but still intact. He opened it carefully, showing neat columns of handwriting. "This is everyone," he said. "All 212 people in our group. Names, ages, family connections, skills they have. I've been keeping it since we organized back in Wyoming." Calla didn't want to look, but found herself scanning the pages anyway. The Hendricks family, father, mother, 4 children aged 6 to 14. Samuel Oakes, age 71, widower, former schoolteacher. The Mortons, expecting their first child. Page after page of lives, of people who'd bet everything on a lie and lost. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because you need to understand what's at stake," Owen said quietly. "These aren't just numbers, they're people. Good people who made one bad decision and are paying for it with everything they have." "Everyone makes bad decisions," Calla said. "That doesn't make them my responsibility." Henry thought differently. Judd's voice from the bed, still rough. but stronger. He wrote that letter because he knew you'd need a push, knew you'd hide behind saying no while good people suffered. Calla turned on him, anger finally breaking through. You don't know anything about what I need. You didn't watch Henry die. You didn't bury him alone. You didn't spend 6 years building a life that finally felt manageable. You're right, Judd said. I don't know that. But I know what Henry wrote. That you need purpose, like other people need air. That being alone isn't healing you, it's just preserving the hurt. He met her eyes steadily. Was he wrong? The silence stretched. Outside, a child laughed at something, the sound bright and brief. A woman called for someone to help with firewood. Life continuing, simple and complicated, whether Calla wanted to acknowledge it or not. 3 days, she said finally. You rest, you organize your people, and in 3 days you move on. I'll show you the best routes east, away from here. That's all I'm offering. And if Taggart arrives before 3 days, Owen asked, then you'd better hope you've got some fighters in that group of yours, because I'm not leading anyone into a gunfight. She took the ledger, despite herself, despite knowing that looking at it more closely would make it harder to send them away. I'll review this, see if there's anyone with useful skills for organizing a defense, just in case. Thank you, Owen said. Don't thank me. I haven't agreed to anything except not throwing you off my mountain immediately. But as they left, and she sat alone with the ledger, Calla found herself reading through every entry. Samuel Oakes, former schoolteacher, he'd know how to organize people, delegate tasks. The Hendricks father was listed as a carpenter. The Morton man had been a freighter, knew wagons and horses. 3 men with military experience scattered through the group. She was, despite every intention otherwise, already planning, already thinking about how to organize 200 frightened people into something that could survive, already falling back into the role Henry had seen so clearly, the one she'd been running from for 6 years. The wedding band on her left hand caught the light. She'd worn it every day since Henry died, a reminder of what she'd lost and why she'd chosen isolation. Now it felt like weight and permission, both the weight of promises made and broken, the permission to finally, maybe, try again. Outside, the settler camp continued taking shape. Fires burned, families huddled together. Someone started singing, an old hymn Calla half remembered from her own traveling days. The sound drifted through the cabin walls, unavoidable and achingly human. She closed the ledger, set it aside, and walked to the window. Darkness was falling, turning the camp into islands of light against the snow. 212 people, most of them would die if Taggart's men caught them on open ground. Maybe all of them. Damn it, Henry, she whispered to the empty cabin. You always did know how to make me do the right thing, even when I hated it. But she still wasn't ready to say yes. Wasn't ready to take responsibility for lives beyond her own. 3 days, she'd said. She meant it. Let them rest, let them organize, and then send them on their way with whatever advice she could offer. 3 days. She could hold out that long, couldn't she? Morning brought complications. Calla woke at dawn to voices outside, more activity than she'd heard in 6 years. She dressed quickly, built up the fire, and checked on Judd. He was awake, looking better, already trying to sit up fully despite obvious pain. Stay down, she said. You tear those stitches and I'm not fixing them again. Need to help organize the camp. The camp's not my concern, which means it's definitely not yours, while you're laid up in my bed. She poured water into a tin cup, handed it to him. Drink. You lost blood and you need to replace fluids. He drank, studying her over the cup's rim. You reviewed the ledger. It wasn't a question. Calla had left it on the table, and apparently her reading it through had been obvious enough. I looked at it, she admitted. Doesn't mean anything. Means you're thinking about how to organize them, how to keep them alive. I'm thinking about the logistics of moving 200 people safely off this mountain in winter. That's different. Is it? Before Calla could answer, someone knocked on the door. She opened it to find Owen, and an older man she didn't recognize, tall, maybe 70, with white hair and the kind of dignity that age and experience gave some people. "Ma'am," Owen said, "this is Samuel Oakes. He's been helping me coordinate the camp, and we wanted to discuss some pressing matters." Samuel offered a slight bow. "Mrs. Vrenn, thank you for allowing us to shelter here, however temporarily." His formality reminded Calla of her father, another man who'd believed manners mattered even on the frontier. Despite herself, she felt some of her resistance soften. "What matters?" she asked. "Supplies primarily," Samuel said. "We're running low on several essentials. Flour, salt, medicine. We rationed carefully during travel, but we weren't expecting to feed this many people for an extended period." "You've got 3 days," Calla said. "Make what you have stretch. We'll do our best, but there's also the question of shelter. Many families who are sleeping in wagons or under canvas that won't hold against a serious storm. The temperature's dropping every night." Calla looked past them at the camp. He was right. Most of their shelters were inadequate at best, dangerous at worst. If a real storm came through, people would freeze. "There's timber down the east slope," she said. "Pine, mostly. You've got men who know how to work wood?" "Several," Owen confirmed. "The Hendricks father is a carpenter. 3 others have experience with construction. Then get them organized. Cut timber, build proper shelters. Not permanent, just good enough for a few days. And keep the axes sharp. Dull tools are how people lose fingers." Both men nodded. Samuel smiled slightly. "You sound like someone who's done this before." "I've led wagon trains." "That's done." Calla's voice carried finality. "But basic survival sense doesn't change just because I'm not leading you." "Of course," Samuel said, though his expression suggested he wasn't convinced. After they left, Judd spoke from the bed. "You're giving orders like a leader. I'm giving common sense advice. There's a difference." "Not much of one." Calla ignored him and went outside. The morning was clear, cold, and bright. Across the camp, people were already moving, women tending fires, men checking wagons, children playing in the snow despite inadequate clothing. She watched a family she recognized from the ledger, the Mortons, the young couple expecting their first child. The wife was visibly pregnant, maybe 7 months along. The husband hovered close, constantly checking on her, looking worried in the way young fathers-to-be always did. They'd die in childbirth if they were caught on the trail in winter. Both of them, probably. The wife from complications, the husband from grief and inability to care for himself afterward. Calla had seen it happen before, too many times. She walked through the camp, ostensibly checking the perimeter, but actually assessing resources and organization. The settlers had done better than she expected. Fires were positioned safely, food preparation was centralized, and someone had already started organizing supply distribution. Not perfect, but functional. Near the southern edge, she found a woman in her early 50s working over a cook fire. The woman looked up, smiled slightly, and gestured to a pot of coffee. "You look like you could use some," she said. "I'm Temperance Webb." Calla accepted the cup, sipped carefully. The coffee was weak, stretched to last longer, but hot and better than nothing. "Thank you." "You're welcome. It's the least I can offer, given you're letting us stay on your land." Temperance stirred something in a larger pot, some kind of stew from the smell. "Owen tells me you've said we can stay 3 days. Is that firm?" "It is. Even if we're not ready to move in 3 days. Especially then." Temperance studied her for a long moment. "You've lost someone. I can see it in how you hold yourself." "Husband?" The direct question startled Calla. "That's personal." "I apologize. It's just I recognize the shape of grief. I'm a widow myself, nearly 8 years now. My Thomas died of fever in Ohio. I know what it looks like when someone's built walls to keep the pain manageable." Calla should have walked away. Should have shut down this conversation before it went anywhere she didn't want it to go. But something about Temperance's direct kindness made her pause. 6 years, she said quietly. Henry died the first winter we spent here. Pneumonia. I'm sorry. That's a hard thing, dying before the life you planned together had a chance to really start. Yes. They stood in silence for a moment. Around them, the camp continued its morning routines. Someone was singing again, a different hymn. Children's voices rose in play or argument, hard to tell which. For what it's worth, Temperance said, Owen told us about the letter, the one from your husband, asking his friend to check on you. That's a man who knew you'd need a push toward living again. That's a man who had no right to interfere from beyond the grave. Maybe, or maybe that's a man who loved you enough to try to save you from yourself. Temperance poured more coffee into Calla's cup without asking. My Thomas didn't get a chance to write me any letters. He went quick, 1 day healthy, and 3 days later gone. I've always wondered what he would have told me if he'd known what was coming. What do you think he would have said? Probably the same thing yours did. That being alone isn't the same as being safe. That grief is something you survive by going through it, not around it. She met Calla's eyes. And that sometimes helping other people is how you find your way back to helping yourself. Before Calla could respond, a commotion near the main trail drew their attention. One of the young men she'd noted in the ledger, Lucas. Something marked as a skilled horseman was running toward Owen's wagon, shouting something. Calla moved quickly, Temperance following. A crowd was gathering. Lucas reached Owen, breathless. Riders, he gasped. 4 of them, maybe a mile down the trail, coming fast. The camp went silent. Everyone had heard. Everyone understood what it meant. Taggart's men, a day early. Owen looked at Calla. What do we do? The old instinct rose strong. Assess, plan, organize, survive. She'd spent 6 years denying it, but denial didn't make it go away. And now 200 people were looking at her with the same question in their eyes. Calla made a decision she'd sworn she wouldn't make. Get every wagon circled tight, north side of the clearing, she said, voice carrying across the suddenly attentive camp. Women and children inside the circle. Any man who can shoot, I want them positioned in those rocks, she pointed, and along that ridgeline. Don't fire unless I give the order. Owen, Samuel, with me. Lucas, get back to your lookout position and keep watching. People moved, fast, organized, following her orders like they'd been waiting for permission to trust someone. Calla walked toward the cabin with Owen and Samuel flanking her. You're taking command, Samuel observed. I'm organizing a defense. Temporarily. Only until these riders leave. And after, you still have 3 days to get ready to move on. But even as she said it, Calla knew she was lying to herself. The moment she'd given that first order, the moment she'd seen that young pregnant woman who'd die without protection, the moment she'd read Henry's letter, maybe even the moment she'd dragged Judd Carroway out of the snow, she'd already made her choice. She was leading again. Whether she wanted to admit it or not, inside the cabin, she moved to the corner where Henry's old military gear remained, untouched for 6 years. His rifle, his ammunition, his field glasses. She pulled them out, checked the rifle's action, loaded it with practiced efficiency. Judd watched from the bed. Welcome back, leader. Shut up, Calla said without heat, but she was smiling slightly as she walked back out to face whatever came next. Not because she wanted this. Not because she'd forgiven herself for Henry's death or accepted responsibility for 200 strangers. But because some part of her, the part Henry had known, was still alive, under all the grief had been waiting 6 years for something worth fighting for. And apparently, despite everything, she'd found it. The 4 riders appeared at the bottom of the final approach 20 minutes later. Calla watched them through Henry's field glasses from a position behind the rocks. Owen and Samuel crouched nearby. The settlers had organized faster than she'd expected. Wagons circled, families sheltered, armed men positioned at the points she'd indicated. Not perfect, but defensible. The riders stopped just outside rifle range. clearly assessing the situation. Even at this distance, Calla could read their body language. Professionals, not thugs. They sat their horses with the confidence of men who'd done violence before and expected to do it again. 4 of them, Owen said quietly. That's not the full group Judd warned us about. Advanced scouts, Calla said, testing our response, seeing how we're organized. The rest will be behind them, probably half a day back. She studied each rider carefully through the glasses. 3 of them wore typical trail clothing, heavy coats, worn hats, working rifles. But the 4th, the one in the lead, was different. Better dressed, sitting straighter, carrying himself like someone who gave orders rather than took them. The one in front, she said. That's someone important, maybe Taggart himself. Can't be, Samuel said. Taggart wouldn't risk himself this early. Then it's someone high enough in his organization to speak for him. The lead rider nudged his horse forward, stopping at a point where his voice would carry. Hello, the camp, he called. We're looking for a group of settlers who pass this way. About 200 people, traveling in wagons. You seen them? Calla handed the field glasses to Owen and stood slowly, making herself visible. You found them? The rider studied her for a long moment. You in charge? I own this land. They're my guests. That's so. The man's tone suggested he didn't believe it. Name's Voss. I work for Marcus Taggart, land agent out of Wyoming. These folks ran out on a legal contract, and we're here to collect what's owed. They don't owe Taggart anything, Calla called back. He sold them land he didn't own, took their money, and now he wants to make sure they can't complain about it. Voss's expression didn't change. That's not how Mr. Taggart sees it. These people signed contracts. They need to honor them. By dying quietly on the trail, by meeting their obligations, he shifted in his saddle. Look, this doesn't have to be complicated. You send them down, we'll escort them back to Wyoming where this can all get sorted proper. No one needs to get hurt. They're not going anywhere, Calla said. And you're trespassing on my property. Turn around and leave. Voss smiled, though there was no warmth in it. See, that's where you're wrong. Mr. Taggart has certain interests in this area, legal interests, and he's got documentation that says these highlands are available for development. So really, you're the one trespassing. The lie was delivered smoothly, confidently. Calla understood immediately. Taggart was making the same play he'd made in Wyoming. Forge documents, claim land, and dare anyone to challenge him legally. I've got a deed filed with the territorial office, Calla said. Properly registered, properly witnessed. This land is mine, purchased legal in 1867. You want to contest that? Take it up with a judge. Maybe we will. Meanwhile, those settlers are coming with us. No, Calla said simply. They're not. Voss studied the camp, clearly counting rifles, assessing defensive positions. His expression suggested he didn't like what he saw. The settlers were better organized than he'd expected, and taking them by force would cost more than he wanted to pay. You're making a mistake, he said finally. Mr. Taggart doesn't take well to interference. Mr. Taggart can take his complaints to the territorial marshal. The real one, not whoever he's bought off. Voss's jaw tightened slightly, the first crack in his professional demeanor. You've got until tomorrow morning to reconsider. After that, we'll come back with more men and settle this our way. Think about that before you get yourself killed protecting people you don't even know. He wheeled his horse around, the other 3 following. They rode back down the trail at a measured pace, not fleeing, just withdrawing tactically. The message was clear. They'd be back, and next time there'd be more of them. Calla watched until they disappeared from view, then lowered herself back behind the rocks. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. Some things you didn't forget, even after 6 years away from them. That went about as well as could be expected, Samuel said quietly. They'll be back by morning, Calla said. With the full 15 men, maybe more. Voss was testing us, seeing if we'd fold easy. Now he knows we won't. Owen looked worried. Can we hold against 15 armed men? Depends on how smart they are and how lucky we get. Calla stood, brushed snow from her knees. Come on, we've got work to do. Back at the cabin, she spread the map across the table again. Judd had managed to get himself upright, leaning against the wall, looking pale but determined. Heard the conversation, he said. Voss is Taggart's top enforcer, ex-cavalry dishonorably discharged. Smart, dangerous, doesn't make mistakes often. Good to know. Calla studied the map, tracing possible approaches. If I were planning an assault on this position, I'd come from 3 directions. Main trail here, obvious approach. But I'd also send men around the north slope and up through that creek bed on the south. Pin us in the center, limit our mobility. Can we defend all 3 approaches? Owen asked. Not easily. We'd need to split our forces, and we don't have enough skilled shooters for that. Samuel leaned over the map. What if we didn't try to defend all 3? What if we funnel them into one approach, make that the killing ground? Calla looked at him with new respect. You've thought about tactics before. I taught military history for 30 years. Reading about it isn't the same as doing it, but I understand the principles. All right. Calla pointed to the narrow section of trail below the cabin. This is where we want them. It's a natural choke point. They can't spread out, can't bring numbers to bear effectively. We block. The other 2 approaches make this the only way up that looks feasible. How do we block them? Owen asked. The north slope we can trigger a rock slide. Not enough to hurt anyone, just enough to make passage impossible. The creek bed on the south, we fell some trees across it. Make it look natural, like storm damage, but positioned so wagons and horses can't get through easily. Judd nodded from the bed. Force them up the main trail where you can control the engagement. Classic defensive strategy. It's also obvious, Calla said. Voss will see what we're doing. But he won't have a choice. He can either come up the trail and take casualties, or he can lay siege and try to starve us out. And he doesn't have time for a siege. Word about Taggart's operation is probably spreading. The longer this takes, the more likely legitimate authorities get involved. Calla studied the map a moment longer, then rolled it up. We've got until morning. That's maybe 14 hours. 2. Prepare the defenses, train anyone who can shoot, and get supplies organized for a possible fight. Everyone needs to know their role and where to be when shooting starts. I can help coordinate the men, Owen said, and I'll work with the families, Samuel added. Make sure everyone knows where to shelter, what to do if things go wrong. Good. Calla moved to the door, paused. And send Temperance Webb to me. I need someone who can organize medical supplies in case we have casualties. After they left, the cabin fell quiet except for the fire's crackle. Judd was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked. You're good at this. Better than good. Henry wasn't exaggerating in that letter. Being good at something doesn't mean you want to do it. No. But sometimes it means you should. Calla didn't answer. She gathered Henry's rifle, checked the ammunition stores, and prepared to spend the next 14 hours turning 200 frightened settlers into something resembling a defendable force. The work consumed the rest of the day. She organized the men with shooting experience into 3 groups, 1 for each defensive position along the main trail. The rest she positioned as reserves, ready to reinforce wherever the fight went hardest. Women who could shoot, and several could, went to positions covering the wagon circle. Children and elderly were moved to the most protected spot, a small depression on the north side, backed by solid rock. Temperance proved invaluable, organizing the medical supplies with calm efficiency. I was a nurse during the war, she explained. Not officially, just helping where I could. But I know how to treat wounds, set bones, deal with fever. Let's hope we don't need you, Calla said. Let's hope, but hope doesn't stop bleeding. As darkness fell, Calla walked the perimeter one final time. Every position, every firing line, every fallback point. The settlers had worked hard, and it showed. Trees felled across the southern creek bed, rocks loosened on the north slope, ready to be triggered. The main trail approach covered by overlapping fields of fire. It wasn't perfect. Professional soldiers would have done better, but for civilians with less than a day to prepare, it was remarkable. Samuel found her near the eastern rocks, standing where she could see down the trail. "The people wanted me to thank you," he said. "Officially, as our spokesman. Don't thank me yet. We might all be dead by tomorrow night. Perhaps, but we'll die fighting, with a chance to survive. That's more than we had yesterday." He was quiet for a moment. "May I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I might not answer. Why did you really agree to help us? I know about the letter, about your husband's request, but you could have still refused. You almost did. What changed your mind?" Calla considered the question. Down below, invisible in the darkness, Taggart's men were preparing their assault. Up here, 200 people were depending on her to keep them alive through whatever came next. "I saw a pregnant woman," she said finally. "Young, maybe 25. Husband hovering over her like she might break. They reminded me of people I knew back when I led wagon trains. Good people who just wanted a chance at something better." She turned to look at Samuel. "They'll die if I don't help. The baby will die. And I spent 6 years hiding from responsibility, telling myself I was done caring about anyone but me. Turns out I'm not as good at not caring as I thought." Samuel smiled slightly. "Henry knew that about you." Henry knew a lot of things. Didn't make them easier to accept. No, but it made them true. He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Vrenn, I'm glad his letter found its way to you. And I'm glad you're the kind of person who, when push came to shove, chose to care." After he left, Calla remained at her position, watching the darkness, waiting for morning. Her wedding band caught moonlight, the gold dull after years of wear. She thought about Henry, about the life they'd planned and lost, about 6 years spent preserving grief instead of healing it. "I hope you know what you got me into," she said quietly to the memory of him. "Because I'm not sure I can do this. Not sure I can keep all these people alive." The wind was her only answer, cold and steady from the north. But somehow, standing there in the darkness with responsibility settling heavy on her shoulders again, Calla felt more alive than she had in 6 years. Scared, yes. Uncertain, absolutely. But alive. And maybe, she thought, that was what Henry had been trying to tell her all along. Dawn came grey and cold, the kind of morning that promised nothing good. Calla had been awake since before first light, checking positions, making final adjustments to the defense. The settlers were quiet, tense, waiting. She could feel their fear, but also their determination. They'd come too far to give up now. Judd had insisted on getting out of bed despite Calla's protests. He sat propped against the cabin wall, rifle across his lap, looking like death but refusing to be useless. "You're going to tear something open," Calla told him. "Probably, but I'm not laying in bed while people fight." He checked his rifle's action, satisfied himself it was working. "Besides, you might need every gun you can get. I might need you not bleeding out in the middle of a firefight. Then I'll try not to get shot again." Temperance appeared with coffee and cornbread breakfast for those at the defensive positions. "Everyone's ready," she said quietly. "Scared, but ready." "Good. Scared or bad scared?" Calla asked. "The useful kind, the kind that keeps you sharp instead of freezing you up." Temperance handed her a cup. "How are you? Been better?" "Been worse." Calla sipped the coffee, grateful for the warmth. "You should be with the families in the protected area." "I will be when the shooting starts. But until then, I'm useful here." Movement down the trail caught Calla's attention. She raised the field, glasses, focused. "They're coming." The full group this time, 15 riders moving up the trail in a loose formation, Voss in the lead again, looking confident. They'd spotted the blocked approaches, just as Calla had expected. The north slope's rock slide was obvious, the fallen trees on the south equally clear. That left only the main trail, exactly as planned. Voss stopped his group just outside rifle range again. This time, he didn't bother with conversation. He simply sat his horse and studied the settlement's defenses, taking his time, clearly planning his approach. "He's going to probe our lines," Judd said from his position. "Test our response. See how good the shooters are." "Let him," Calla replied. "Every minute he spends planning is another minute for help to maybe arrive." "What help? We're on our own." "I know. But he doesn't know what we might have sent for." It was a bluff, but warfare was half bluff anyway. Make the enemy think twice, hesitate, question their intelligence. Even a few hours' delay could matter. Voss made his decision. He split his force, 10 men dismounting to advance on foot up the trail, 5 staying mounted further back as reserves. Smart tactics, the kind that came from experience. The dismounted men spread out as much as the terrain allowed and began moving forward, using cover, advancing carefully. "Here we go," Owen said from his position in the rocks. "Hold fire," Calla called, voice carrying to the other positions. "Let them get closer. Make every shot count." The advancing men moved with practiced coordination, not bunched up, not exposed, using terrain to maximum advantage. Voss had trained them well. They covered maybe 200 yards, closing the distance, testing to see when the defenders would react. Calla waited, watching through the glasses, judging distance. They needed to be close enough that even the settlers' less experienced shooters could hit targets, but not so close that a rush could overwhelm the positions. 100 yards, Judd said quietly, reading her thinking. "That's your kill zone." She waited. The advancing men reached 150 yards, 125, 110. "Fire," Calla said, not shouting but speaking clearly enough to be heard. The first volley crashed out, 6 rifles firing nearly simultaneously. 2 of Taggart's men went down immediately. A third stumbled, hit but not killed. The others dove for cover, returning fire but shooting blind, not having identified the defensive positions yet. "Reload," Calla called. "Pick your targets. Don't waste ammunition." The next few minutes were controlled chaos. Taggart's men tried to advance, but were driven back by accurate fire from the defended positions. They tried flanking movements, but found themselves exposed on the narrow trail, forced to retreat. 3 of them were down now, 2 clearly dead, 1 wounded badly enough to be out of the fight. Voss, watching from his mounted position, made another decision. He pulled his men back, clearly reassessing. The defenders were better organized and better shots than he'd expected. A frontal assault was going to cost more than he wanted to pay. "Ceasefire," Calla called. "Conserve ammunition." The gunfire died away. Smoke drifted across the morning air. The wounded man from Taggart's group was crying out, a thin sound of pain that carried in the sudden quiet. "They're regrouping," Samuel observed. "They'll try something different next," Judd said. "Maybe wait for dark, try to infiltrate our positions." But Voss surprised them. He rode forward alone, stopping at the edge of rifle range but making himself a clear target. Brave or stupid, Calla couldn't quite decide which. "You've made your point," he called up. "You can defend this position, but you can't hold it forever. We can wait you out, cut off your supplies, starve you down." "Try it," Calla shouted back. "Winter's coming hard. We've got shelter and provisions. You've got tents and whatever supplies you packed. Who do you think outlasts who? Mr. Taggart has resources. More men, more supplies, more patience than you can imagine. Then bring them. But every day you sit out there is another day. Word spreads about what Taggart's doing. How long before someone official starts asking questions?" Voss was silent for a long moment. "Mr. Taggart wants to make you an offer. I'm listening. You let the settlers come down peacefully. In exchange, he'll leave you alone." No claim on your land. No interference with your life here. You go back to being the mountain woman, alone and unbothered. It was tempting. 6 years ago, it was what she would have wanted more than anything. Return to solitude, let other people handle their own problems, protect the careful peace she'd built. But 6 years ago, she hadn't read Henry's letter, hadn't seen young families depending on her, hadn't remembered what it felt like to have purpose beyond simple survival. No, she said, they stay. You leave. You're making a mistake. I've made plenty. I'll survive one more. Voss studied her for another moment, then nodded slowly. All right. We'll do this the hard way. He rode back to his men, issued orders Calla couldn't hear. The group withdrew down the trail, out of sight, but probably not far. Setting up a siege position most likely, planning to wait her out, pressure her until supplies ran low or morale broke. That went better than expected, Owen said. It went exactly as expected, Calla corrected. He tested our defenses, lost 3 men, and decided frontal assault costs too much. Now, he'll try to wait us out. The question is how long we can hold before someone breaks. We've got maybe 3 weeks of full supplies if we ration carefully, Samuel said. After that, things get difficult. 3 weeks is time enough for word to reach Fort Randall, Judd offered. If someone could get through Voss's lines. Calla turned to look at him. You thinking what I think you're thinking? Send riders, 2 of them, different routes. Better chance one gets through. He shifted, winced at the pain. I know the territory. I can guide them on a map, show them routes that avoid the main trails. You can barely sit up, which is why I'm not volunteering to ride. But Lucas, the young horseman who spotted Voss yesterday, he's skilled enough, and we've got at least one other experienced rider in the group. Calla considered it. It was risky sending 2 people through hostile territory with Taggart's men between here and the fort. But Judd was right. The time was on their side if they could get word to legitimate authorities. The territorial army didn't take kindly to private forces besieging civilians. I'll think about it, she said. The rest of the day passed in tense watchfulness. Taggart's men made no further moves, content to hold position down the trail. Calla organized watches, made sure everyone rested in shifts, and reviewed their supply situation with Owen and Samuel. That evening, as sunset painted the snow orange and purple, Calla found herself walking the perimeter again. It had become a ritual, checking positions, reassuring people, staying visible so the settlers knew their leader hadn't abandoned them. She found Temperance at one of the fires, preparing evening rations. How are people holding up? Calla asked. Better than I expected. They're scared, but they trust you. That counts for a lot. They shouldn't. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. Neither does anyone else in a crisis. The trick is looking like you do. Temperance stirred the pot, added some dried herbs. Can I tell you something? If you must. When my Thomas died, I spent 2 years, angry at the world, angry at God for taking him, angry at myself for not saving him somehow, angry at every person who went on living normally while I was drowning. She looked up, met Calla's eyes. And then one day, a neighbor's barn caught fire, children trapped inside, and I ran in without thinking, pulled 3 kids out before the roof collapsed. Could have died. Should have. Probably. But you didn't. But I didn't. And afterwards, sitting there, coughing smoke, covered in burns, I realized something. I felt alive again. Not happy alive. There's a difference. What's your point? My point is that grief does something to us. It makes us small, makes us careful, makes us want to wrap ourselves in walls and never risk anything again. But that's not living. That's just not dying. Temperance handed her a bowl of stew. You've been not dying for 6 years. Henry's letter was his way of giving you permission to live again, to risk, to lead, to care about people even knowing. You might lose them. I might get everyone here killed, Calla said quietly. You might. But you might save them too. And either way, you're living again. That matters. Calla ate the stew in silence, thinking about Temperance's words, about Henry's letter, about the young pregnant woman and her worried husband, about Samuel's dignity, about Owen's determination, about 200 people who'd placed their lives in her hands, whether she'd asked for it or not. Later, in the cabin, she sat with Judd and the map. He showed her the routes he knew, the paths that avoided main trails, the places where a skilled rider could slip through hostile territory. "Lucas can make it," Judd said. "And I think the Morton boy, the husband with the pregnant wife, he's got experience with fast riding. Used to freight, knows how to push a horse without breaking it. Morton needs to stay with his wife. His wife needs him to get help. She knows it. He knows it. They've already talked about it." Calla studied the map, the routes, the risks. It was a gamble. But sitting here waiting for Voss to either attack or starve them out was a gamble too. At least this way they were taking action. "All right," she said. "We send them tomorrow night. Give Voss another day to settle into his siege routine, get comfortable, get predictable. Then we slip 2 riders past him in the dark. They'll need supplies, fast horses, and something to convince the fort commander this isn't just settlers crying wolf." Calla went to the corner of the cabin, the place where Henry's things remained stored. She pulled out a small wooden box, opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents, their original land deed, properly filed and witnessed. Letters of reference from the territorial governor. Henry's military discharge papers, honorable service with commendations, and something else, something Henry had been working on before he died, that Calla had found but never fully understood. Survey documents, correspondence, evidence of territorial land fraud, of agents forging claims and selling land they didn't own. Henry had been investigating, had been gathering proof, had died before he could do anything with it. "What is all this?" Judd asked, looking through the papers. "Proof," Calla said slowly, understanding dawning. Henry knew something was wrong with land claims in the territories. He'd been tracking it, documenting it. This is evidence of fraud going back years. And Taggart? I'd bet everything that Taggart's name is in here somewhere. She spread the papers out. Henry died before he could bring this to authorities. But if we get this to Fort Randall, to the territorial marshal, we don't just save these settlers, we take down Taggart's whole operation. Calla felt something shift in her chest. Henry hadn't just left her a letter asking someone to check on her. He'd left her the tools to finish what he'd started, to make his death mean something beyond just loss. "We send the riders tomorrow night," she said, "with this evidence, and we pray they make it through." Outside, stars were appearing in the clear winter sky. Down the trail, campfires marked where Taggart's men waited. And up here, 200 settlers tried to sleep, trusting that the woman who'd chosen isolation would somehow find a way to keep them all alive. Calla touched her wedding band, then slowly, deliberately, pulled it off her finger. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight, remembering everything it represented. Then she placed it in the box with Henry's letters and documents, not forgetting, not abandoning his memory. But finally, 6 years later, allowing herself to step forward instead of always looking back. "Get some rest," she told Judd. "Tomorrow, we plan the details. Tomorrow night, we change the game." And for the first time in 6 years, Calla Vrenn went to sleep, feeling like she had a purpose beyond simple survival. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and exactly what Henry had known she needed all along. The second day of the siege began quietly. Too quietly, Calla thought. Voss's men remained at their position down the trail, visible but making no aggressive moves. It felt wrong somehow, like a predator showing itself to keep prey focused in one direction, while the real attack came from elsewhere. She shared her concerns with Judd over morning coffee. "He's waiting for something," she said. "Voss isn't patient by nature, you said so yourself. He should be pushing harder, trying to pressure us. Maybe the casualties shook him. 3 men down from 1 engagement isn't good odds. Or maybe he knows something we don't. The answer came mid-morning, announced by Lucas, running toward the cabin from his scouting position. "Riders coming," he gasped, "but not from down the trail. From the east, and they're not Taggart's men." Calla grabbed the field glasses and followed him to the eastern overlook. Sure enough, 3 riders were approaching from the direction of the lower valleys, moving fast. They wore no visible insignia, but something about their bearing suggested official business. "Could be help," Owen said hopefully, joining them. "Could be," Calla agreed, but her instinct said otherwise. The riders reached the outer edge of the settlement and dismounted. The lead man was perhaps 45, well-dressed for frontier travel, carrying himself with authority. He approached the defensive line with both hands visible, clearly expecting to be allowed through. "I'm looking for Mrs. Calla Vrenn," he called. "You found her," Calla replied, not moving from her position. "Marshal Deputy Cornelius Wade, ma'am, Territorial Authority. I'm here about a disturbance reported in this area, some kind of dispute over land claims and settler rights." He produced a badge, held it up for inspection. It looked legitimate, but Calla had learned that Taggart had access to convincing forgeries. "You'll forgive me for being cautious," she said, "given the circumstances." "I understand completely. May I approach? I have documents I'd like you to review." Calla nodded to Owen, who allowed the deputy through. Wade walked up calmly, his 2 companions remaining with the horses. Up close, he looked even more official, clean-shaven, professional, carrying the kind of confidence that came from legitimate authority. He handed Calla a leather folder. "These are complaints filed against the settlers currently sheltering here. Breach of contract, theft of supplies, threatening a licensed land agent. Quite serious charges." Calla opened the folder, read through the documents. They were professionally prepared, with official stamps and signatures. Complaint after complaint, all signed by Marcus Taggart, all painting the settlers as criminals and frauds. "These are lies," she said flatly. "That's for a court to determine, ma'am. My job is to ensure the law is followed, and that disputes are resolved properly." He gestured down the trail toward Voss's position. "I've spoken with Mr. Taggart's representatives. They're willing to resolve this peacefully if the settlers surrender themselves to territorial custody and return to Wyoming to face the charges. And if they don't, then I'm authorized to deputize Mr. Taggart's men and enforce the law by whatever means necessary." His expression was sympathetic but firm. "I understand you've taken these people under your protection, Mrs. Vrenn, but you're interfering with legal proceedings. That makes you liable for charges as well, harboring fugitives, obstruction of justice." Judd had made his way to the door of the cabin, leaning heavily against the frame. "Let me see that badge," he called. Wade walked over, held it out. Judd studied it carefully, then looked at the man's face. "You're no territorial deputy. That badge is real enough, but it doesn't belong to you. Where'd Taggart get it? Buy it off? A corrupt official? Steal it from a real marshal?" Wade's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "You're making dangerous accusations." "I'm stating facts. I served with territorial law enforcement for 5 years. I know every deputy in this region. You're not one of them. Times change, personnel changes. Not that fast, not in 6 months." Judd's voice was gaining strength. "You're part of Taggart's operation. Probably the piece that makes it all work, the fake legal authority that lets him file false claims and intimidate real officials." Wade studied Judd for a long moment, then sighed. The sympathetic expression vanished, replaced by something colder. "Smart man," he said. "Shame it won't help you." He pulled a folded paper from his coat, handed it to Calla. "This is the real reason I'm here, Mrs. Vrenn. That's a territorial survey, properly filed, showing that this land, your land, was never legally yours. Henry Vrenn filed the claim using fraudulent documents. The original parcels were already allocated to territorial development, specifically to Marcus Taggart's development company. Calla felt the ground shift beneath her. That's impossible. Our deed is legitimate. It was filed properly, witnessed, recorded. It was filed based on false survey data. Your late husband, it seems, had help from someone in the land office who was later dismissed for corruption. All claims filed by that individual are now considered void. Wade's voice was professionally regretful. I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're squatting on Mr. Taggart's land. You have 24 hours to vacate. Let me see that survey, Judd demanded. Wade handed it over. Judd read through it, his expression darkening. This is technically legal. Filed properly, witnessed, recorded with what looks like legitimate authority. Of course it is, Wade said. Mr. Taggart doesn't break laws. He uses them. Calla felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't just about helping the settlers anymore. Whether she sent them away or not, Taggart had already moved to take her land, the place she and Henry had built together, the last thing she had of their life, the reason she'd stayed isolated for 6 years. This has been Taggart's plan all along, she said slowly, understanding dawning. Use the settlers to draw me out, force me into a defensive position, then use fake legal authority to claim my land was never mine. Whether I fight or run, he wins. Mr. Taggart is a thorough man, Wade agreed. He researches his targets carefully. When he learned the settlers were heading toward this area, he saw an opportunity. Your land could anchor a network of fraudulent claims across the highlands, very valuable to his operation. And if she'd never gotten involved, Samuel asked from nearby. He would have found another reason, but this was neater, more efficient. Wade turned back to Calla. You can make this easy or hard, Mrs. Vrenn. Easy is, you surrender your claim, convince the settlers to do the same. Everyone walks away alive. Hard is, we enforce the law, and people die. Your choice. There's a third option, Calla said quietly. Which is, I prove your entire legal framework is fraudulent. That Taggart's been running this scheme for years, using bought officials and forged documents. That everything he claims to own is built on lies. Wade smiled. And how would you do that? You're isolated up here. You have no access to territorial records, no connections to legitimate officials. By the time you could mount any kind of legal challenge, this would all be settled. Unless I already have evidence. Unless my husband spent his last months investigating exactly this kind of fraud and gathering proof. The smile faded slightly. That's an interesting bluff, Mrs. Vrenn. It's not a bluff. Calla met his eyes steadily. Henry knew something was wrong with territorial land claims. He documented it. Names, dates, forged documents, corruption in the land office. And I've got every piece of paper he collected. For the first time, Wade looked uncertain. He glanced back toward his companions, then toward Voss's position down the trail. A decision was being made behind his eyes. Even if that's true, he said carefully, you'd need to get that evidence to legitimate authorities, and you're surrounded by men who won't let that happen. Maybe, but now you know I have it, which means Taggart knows, and that changes everything. Calla took a step toward him. Because as long as this stays a simple land dispute, he wins. But if evidence of his fraud reaches the territorial governor, if his whole operation gets exposed, he loses everything, not just these parcels, all of it. Years of work, thousands of acres of false claims, everything he's built. Wade's expression had gone hard. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. I'm making it exactly as complicated as it always was. You just didn't know it until now. A long silence stretched. Around them, the settlers watched, not fully understanding the conversation, but recognizing its importance. Voss's men, visible down the trail, seemed to sense something had changed. Wade finally nodded slowly. "I'll convey your position to Mr. Taggart. But understand, if you have that evidence, he'll do anything to prevent it from reaching legitimate authorities. Anything. These men," he gestured toward Voss's position, "they're the polite enforcement. If you push this, he'll bring worse. Let him try." Wade walked back to his horses, his companions mounting quickly. Before riding away, he turned back one last time. "Mr. Taggart will offer you one more deal. He'll send word within the hour. I'd suggest you seriously consider accepting it, Mrs. Vrenn, because after that, there's no more talking." They rode east, disappearing into the trees. Calla stood watching them go, feeling the full weight of what had just happened settling on her shoulders. "He's right," Judd said quietly. "Taggart will do anything now. This just became a fight for his entire operation, not just this one piece of land." "I know, and we're still surrounded by his men, with no clear way to get that evidence out." "I know that too." Owen approached, looking worried. "What just happened?" "Everything got worse," Calla said. "Taggart's been using my land as collateral for his schemes. Whether I help you or not, he was always going to take it, and now he knows I have evidence that could destroy everything he's built. So, what do we do?" Calla looked at the settlers gathered around, at the families who depended on her, at the young pregnant woman whose husband would need to ride through hostile territory to get help, at Temperance and Samuel and Owen and all the others who'd placed their trust in a woman who'd spent 6 years refusing to trust anyone. "We send the riders tonight as planned," she said, "but not just to get help. To get that evidence to Fort Randall before Taggart can stop us. And we hold this position no matter what he throws at us, because if we break, everyone loses everything." She walked back toward the cabin, her mind already working through the logistics, the timing, the desperate gamble they were about to make. Behind her, she heard Samuel say something quietly to Owen about courage and leadership, but Calla didn't feel courageous. She felt terrified, felt the weight of 200 lives and 6 years of Henry's investigative work, all resting on decisions she'd make in the next few hours. Inside the cabin, she pulled out Henry's documents and began organizing them for travel. Waterproof wrapping, multiple copies if possible, clear instructions for the riders on who to contact at Fort Randall. Her wedding band, removed from her finger the night before, sat in its box beside the papers. She looked at it for a long moment, then made a decision. She wrapped it carefully in cloth and tucked it into the document package. "For identification," she told herself, "so they know the evidence is legitimate." But really, it was something else. It was finally, truly letting go. Not of Henry's memory, but of the grief that had kept her frozen for 6 years. Sending it out into the world with his life's work, trusting that something good could still come from what they'd built together. "I'm sorry I didn't understand sooner," she said quietly to his memory. "But I understand now, and I'm going to finish what you started." Outside, the afternoon light was already fading. Night would come soon. And with it, the most dangerous gamble of all, sending 2 riders through hostile territory, carrying evidence that could destroy Marcus Taggart's empire. Calla just had to keep everyone alive long enough for them to make it through. Taggart's response came an hour before sunset, delivered by Voss himself riding forward under a white flag. Calla met him at the perimeter, rifle in hand, but lowered in respect for the truce symbol. "Mr. Taggart has a final offer," Voss said without preamble. "You sign over your land deed, whatever claim you think you have. The settlers disperse, go wherever they want, as long as it's not together where they might organize complaints. And you walk away with $5,000 in gold, enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere far from here. And the evidence my husband collected gets turned over to Mr. Taggart for proper disposal. He assures me it's based on misunderstandings and outdated information anyway." "I'm sure he does." Calla studied Voss carefully. "What happens if I say no?" "Then at dawn, we come with everything we have. Not just the men you've seen. Mr. Taggart has 20 more arriving tonight. 35 armed men total, Mrs. Vrenn. You can't hold against that, no matter how good your defensive position is. Maybe not, but I can make it cost him more than he wants to pay. Voss's expression showed something like respect. You're a fighter, I'll give you that. But fighting when you can't win is just stubbornness, wearing courage's clothes. Or maybe it's standing for something that matters more than survival. 5,000 in gold, Mrs. Vrenn. That's more money than most people see in a lifetime out here. You could go anywhere, do anything. Why die for land that, legally speaking, isn't even yours anymore? Because it was mine. Because Henry and I built something here, and because if I let Taggart take it without a fight, I'm letting him win not just here, but everywhere. Every claim he's forged, every family he's swindled, every life he's destroyed, all of it continues if nobody stands up. Voss was quiet for a moment. You know, I have to carry out his orders. Whatever you decide, I know. Some of your people will die. Maybe all of them. That weight's on you. The weight's on Taggart for starting this, on you for following his orders. Don't try to put his crimes on my conscience. Voss nodded slowly, turned his horse. Dawn, Mrs. Vrenn, make your peace with whatever god you pray to. He rode back down the trail, the white flag still flying. Calla watched him go, then turned to find half the settlement watching her. We're not surrendering, she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. Taggart's bringing more men, 35 total. They'll attack at dawn. Between now and then, we prepare, we rest, and we trust the 2 people we're sending out tonight will reach help before it's too late. She'd expected fear, maybe protests. Instead, she saw determination. These people had been running for weeks, beaten down by Taggart's systematic cruelty. Now, someone was finally standing up, finally fighting back. That meant something, even if the odds were terrible. Samuel approached as the crowd dispersed to final preparations. 35 men, can we hold? Not forever. Maybe not even for a full day. But we can. Hold long enough, she hoped. How are the families? Scared, resolved. The parents are writing letters to children, just in case. People are making peace with each other, settling old arguments. The things people do when they think tomorrow might not come. Calla felt that weight settle heavier. I'm asking them to die for my stubbornness. No, you're giving them a chance to die standing up instead of running. That's not nothing, Mrs. Vrenn. For people who've spent weeks being pushed around, treated like they don't matter, you're giving them back their dignity. Win or lose, that matters. In the cabin, Calla and Judd made final preparations for the riders. Lucas would go south, taking the longer but more concealed route. The Morton boy, his name was Daniel, Calla had learned, would go northeast, faster but more exposed. Each carried half the documents, carefully wrapped and secured. Each had been briefed on who to find at Fort Randall, what to say, how to convince skeptical officers that this wasn't just settler hysteria. You've got maybe 8 hours before Taggart realizes you're gone, Judd told them. That's your head start. Use it well. Don't stop for anything. If one of you goes down, the other keeps going. Daniel looked at Calla. My wife, if I don't make it back, I'll take care of her. Both of them. When the baby comes. It was a promise she might not be able to keep, but she made it anyway. Some promises mattered more than likelihood. Thank you. Lucas was checking his gear one final time, nervous energy making him fidget. What if the fort doesn't believe us? What if they think we're just making up stories? Then you make them believe, Calla said. You show them the evidence. You tell them about the families here, about the children, about people who just wanted an honest chance and got swindled instead. You make them understand that if they don't act, good people die while criminals prosper. And if that doesn't work, then you go higher. Territorial governor, federal marshal, whoever will listen. You don't stop until someone acts. They left an hour after full dark, slipping out through carefully prepared routes that avoided Voss's positions. Calla watched them disappear into the night, carrying everything that mattered: proof of Taggart's crimes, hope for the settlers, and the last pieces of what she and Henry had built together. "Now we wait," Judd said beside her. "Now we hold," Calla corrected, "for as long as it takes." The night passed in tense preparation. Every defensive position was reinforced. Ammunition was distributed. Medical supplies were organized in the protected area, where Temperance had set up a makeshift field hospital. Families said quiet goodbyes, just in case. Children were settled in the safest spots, told stories to keep them calm, given whatever comfort could be offered. Calla walked the perimeter constantly, checking everything, reassuring people, being visible. Leadership wasn't just tactics and strategy. It was showing people their leader wasn't afraid, wasn't giving up, believed they could survive. Even when she wasn't sure, she believed it herself. Near midnight, she found Temperance preparing supplies in the hospital area. "You should rest," Calla told her. "So should you. But neither of us will." Temperance was organizing bandages, organizing surgical tools that looked primitive but were all they had. "I've been thinking about what you said before, about not being sure you could keep everyone alive. I'm still not sure." "Good. The ones who are sure are the ones who make fatal mistakes. Doubt keeps you careful, keeps you thinking." She looked up. "But doubt isn't the same as despair. You know the difference? Tell me." Doubt says, "This might not work." Despair says, "Nothing will work." You've got doubt, which is smart. But you're still fighting, still planning, still leading. That's how I know you're the right person for this, or just the only person desperate enough to try. Same thing, sometimes. Temperance went back to her preparations. "My Thomas used to say that courage isn't not being afraid, it's being terrified and doing what needs doing anyway. You're terrified, I can see it. But you're still here, still leading. That's courage enough." Around 2 in the morning, one of the sentries reported movement, Taggart's reinforcements arriving. Calla watched through the field glasses as more men joined Voss's camp. She counted them carefully. 23 new arrivals, making 38 total with the men already there. Worse odds than Voss had promised. But not surprising. Taggart would throw everything at this position, knowing it was his last chance to contain the evidence before it reached authorities who might actually act. At 4, Calla gathered the defensive leaders, Owen, Samuel, the few men with military experience. They reviewed the plan one final time. Hold the main, choke point as long as possible, fall back to secondary positions when necessary, protect the wagon circle and the families at all costs. Make Taggart's men pay for every yard they gained. "They'll come hard and fast at dawn," she told them. "Overwhelming force, trying to break us before we can settle into sustained defense. The first hour is critical. If we hold that, we've got a chance. And if we don't," one of the men asked, "then we make them remember they were in a fight. Make it cost enough that Taggart thinks twice about trying this again somewhere else." As the sky began to lighten false dawn, that grey period before true sunrise, Calla took one final walk through the settlement. People were awake, waiting, holding weapons or each other or both. She saw fear but also determination. Saw families together, holding on to what mattered most. Saw the young, pregnant woman, her husband gone to get help, resting one hand on her swollen belly and gripping a rifle with the other. "We're ready," Owen said, joining her at the central defensive position. "As ready as we can be. Do you think the riders made it through? I think if they didn't, we'll know soon enough. And if they did, we just need to hold until help arrives." "How long do you think that is?" 2 days minimum, 3 more likely, maybe 4 if weather or bureaucracy slows things down. "Can we hold 4 days against 38 armed men?" Calla didn't answer immediately. She looked at the defensive positions, at the terrain, at the settlers who'd somehow transformed from frightened refugees into something like soldiers, at the mountain that had been her prison and sanctuary, now becoming her battlefield. "We can hold as long as we have to," she said finally, "because the alternative is letting Taggart win, and I'm done letting men like him win." The sun broke the horizon, spilling golden light across the snow, beautiful and terrible like the morning itself. Down the trail, Taggart's men began to move, forming up, checking weapons, preparing for the assault. Calla raised her rifle, checked the action one final time. Around her, other rifles did the same. A sound like a mechanical prayer, asking for accuracy and survival in equal measure. "Here they come," Judd said from his position near the cabin. And they did. 38 men advancing in 3 waves, using cover and coordination, moving with the confidence of superior numbers and professional violence. Calla let them close, watched them come, waited for the moment, that perfect instant when commitment became vulnerability. "Hold," she called. "Hold." The leading edge reached 100 yards, 80, 60. Fire. The dawn erupted in smoke and thunder. The war for the mountain had begun. The first volley tore into Taggart's lead wave with devastating effect. 6 men went down immediately, the narrow trail forcing them into a killing zone that negated their numerical advantage. The survivors scrambled for cover, returning fire but shooting wild, their formation broken before it had really formed. "Reload," Calla called. "Pick your targets, make them pay for every step." The second wave tried to advance through the chaos of the first, but the defenders had found their rhythm. Rifle fire cracked from multiple positions, coordinated and accurate. 3 more of Taggart's men fell. The rest pulled back, dragging wounded with them. "First blood to us," Owen said, breathing hard, hands shaking slightly with adrenaline. "They're probing," Calla replied, "testing our response. The real attack comes next." She was right. Voss had pulled his men back to regroup, and now he was organizing them properly. She could see him through the field glasses, pointing, giving orders, dividing his force. He'd learned from the first engagement. This time would be different. The second assault came from 2 directions simultaneously. 20 men up the main trail, advancing in coordinated rushes using available cover. Another 15 working their way up the north slope, where the triggered rockslide had left enough gaps for determined men to climb through. "North slope," Calla shouted. "Reinforce the north positions." Half the defenders shifted, racing to meet the new threat. The next several minutes dissolved into chaos, smoke and noise, and men shouting. Calla moved between positions, directing fire, encouraging shooters, making split-second decisions about where to concentrate their limited forces. A bullet whined past her head, close enough she felt the air displacement. She dropped, rolled, came up behind better cover, returned fire at the muzzle flash that had targeted her. Someone screamed, one of the settlers, hit in the shoulder, but not killed. Temperance was already moving toward him, staying low, pulling him back to the hospital area. The main trail attackers reached the first defensive position, close enough now for brutal fighting. 2 of the settlers were down, 1 clearly dead, the other wounded but still fighting. Taggart's men were paying for the advance bodies sprawled on the trail, wounded men crawling back, but they were gaining ground through sheer determination and numbers. "Fall back," Calla ordered. "Secondary positions. Move." The defenders retreated in reasonable order, each position covering the others as they withdrew. It was the moment Calla had planned for, expected, but it still felt like losing. Giving up ground, trading space for time, hoping the plan held together under pressure. The secondary positions were stronger, better cover, overlapping fields of fire, closer to the wagon circle where the families sheltered. Taggart's men advanced into them and paid the price. Accurate fire from multiple angles cut down 5 more attackers. The assault stalled, the survivors diving for whatever cover they could find. Voss pulled them back again, clearly frustrated. The trail behind him was littered, with casualties dead and wounded, maybe 15 men out of the fight already. But he still had 23 effectives, and the defenders were down to maybe 40 who could shoot effectively, several of those already wounded. "They'll try to flank us again," Judd said, his face pale with pain but his eyes sharp. Voss knows the frontal assault costs too much. He'll look for a weak point. South side, Calla said. The creek bed. We blocked it, but determined men could clear it. Can we reinforce there? Not without weakening somewhere else. We're spread thin already. A commotion near the hospital area drew her attention. One of the wounded settlers, the man who'd been hit in the shoulder, had started screaming. Not pain, something else. Panic, maybe, or shock finally breaking through. Temperance was with him, trying to calm him down, but his cries were affecting others. Fear was contagious, especially under fire. Calla could see it spreading, people looking around. Whispering, doubt creeping in. She moved quickly through the defensive positions, making herself visible, speaking calmly. We're holding. They've lost nearly half their force. We're doing exactly what we needed to do. But we're losing ground, someone said. We're trading ground for casualties. That's the plan. We make them pay for every yard, and we wait for help to arrive. What if help doesn't come? Then we hold anyway. Because the alternative is surrender, and I didn't bring you this far to quit now. It was bravado, mostly confidence she didn't entirely feel. But leadership was often performance, showing people what they needed to see rather than what you actually felt. The third assault came an hour later, and it was the worst yet. Voss had reorganized completely, divided his remaining forces into 3 groups. 10 men on the main trail, 8 on the north slope, 5 trying to force the southern creek bed. Coordinated, simultaneous, designed to split the defenders' attention and find a breaking point. Calla raced between positions, trying to be everywhere at once. The main trail group was advancing steadily despite losses. The north slope attackers had found a route through the rocks and were pressing hard. And on the south, the 5-man team was clearing the felled trees with axes and ropes, determined to open a new route. We can't hold all 3, Owen gasped, blood running from a cut on his scalp where a bullet had grazed him. We don't need to hold all 3. We need to break one assault decisively. Make them think twice about the next attempt. She made a decision. Pull everyone from the south. Let them clear the creek bed, concentrate everything on the north slope. Break that assault completely. It was a gamble. If the southern group got through, they'd have a clear route to the wagon circle. But if the defenders broke the north assault decisively, they'd demoralize Voss's remaining men and buy time. The gamble worked. 20 rifles, concentrating on 8 attackers, was overwhelming. Within minutes, the north slope assault collapsed, survivors retreating in disorder. Taggart's men left 4 bodies behind and carried 3 wounded back with them. But while everyone was focused north, the southern team completed their clearing and advanced through the creek bed. 5 determined men, now behind the defensive lines, moving toward the wagon circle where families sheltered. Calla saw them, realized the danger. South side, intruders in the camp. She ran, rifle in hand, Owen and 2 others following. The southern team had spread out, using wagons for cover, clearly planning to either take hostages or create enough chaos to break the defenders' morale. Calla dropped behind a wagon, saw one of Taggart's men moving past. She fired, dropped him. Owen got another. But the remaining 3 had reached the central area where women and children huddled. A woman screamed. A child cried out. Calla felt ice in her veins. If Taggart's men took hostages, everything changed. All the defensive planning, all the careful positioning meant nothing if civilians were at risk. She moved fast, trusting instinct more than planning. Came around a wagon to find one of Taggart's men grabbing a young woman not as hostage, she realized, but preparing to hurt her simply because he could. The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that these people were just tools to be used, broke something loose in Calla. She fired without hesitation, dropping the man before he could complete whatever violence he'd intended. The other 2 intruders saw her, raised their weapons. But Temperance appeared from behind them, swinging a heavy iron skillet with surprising force. She hit one man across the back of the head, dropping him instantly. The last intruder raised his rifle toward her, and Calla shot him through the chest. Silence fell in the immediate area. The 3 intruders were down, 2 clearly dead, 1 unconscious. Around them, women and children stared with wide eyes. "Everyone all right?" Calla asked. Nods, tears, but no serious injuries. "Get them back to the protected area," she told Temperance. "And well done with that skillet. My Thomas always said I had a good swing." Temperance replied, her voice shaking slightly but her hands steady. The assault had broken. Voss pulled his remaining men back down the trail, leaving bodies and wounded scattered across the approaches. Calla counted quickly. Taggart's force had been cut to maybe 15 effectives. The defenders had lost 4 dead, 8 wounded, seriously enough to be out of the fight. The sun was past noon now. They'd held through the morning, turned back multiple assaults, survived when survival seemed unlikely. But Voss wasn't done. She could see him down the trail, still organizing, still planning. He'd lost more than half his force, but he still had enough men to eventually overwhelm the defenders if he was willing to pay the price. And Taggart, she knew, would be willing to pay almost any price to prevent that evidence from reaching authorities. "How much longer?" Samuel asked, joining her at the defensive line. He was unwounded but exhausted, moving like every year of his 71 showed in his bones. "At least another day. Maybe 2. Depends how fast the riders traveled, how quickly the fort responds. Can we hold that long?" Calla looked at the depleted defensive positions, the wounded being tended in the hospital area, the families huddling together for comfort and warmth. At the bodies of settlers who died fighting, at the blood-staining snow that had been pristine just hours ago. "We have to," she said simply, "because there's no other choice." Night fell with no further attacks. Voss had withdrawn to a camp out of rifle range, tending his wounded, planning his next move. Calla used the respite to reorganize defenses, move the wounded to better shelter, and let people rest in shifts. The cost of the day's fighting was evident everywhere. 4 settlers dead, 8 more, wounded seriously. Ammunition was running low. Another sustained assault would leave them fighting with rocks and desperation. Food supplies were stretched thin, and morale, while not broken, was fraying at the edges. Calla found Daniel Morton's young wife helping Temperance with the wounded. Her hands were bloody from assisting with field surgery, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. "Any word?" the woman asked. "About her husband, about help, about anything that suggested survival?" "Not yet, but no news might be good news. Means he's still moving, still trying. Or it means he's dead, and we don't know it yet. Don't think like that. He's smart, he's skilled, and he's got every reason in the world to make it through." Calla touched her shoulder gently. "How are you feeling? The baby?" "We're fine. Scared, but fine." She managed a weak smile. "I keep thinking about what name we'll choose. Seems silly to plan for a future that might not come." "It's not silly. It's hope. And hope is what keeps people going when everything else says quit." Around midnight, one of the sentries reported movement riders approaching from the north. Not Taggart's men. The direction was wrong. Calla grabbed the field glasses, trying to see through darkness illuminated only by moon and stars. 3 riders, moving cautiously, following the trail that Daniel should have taken. Her heart leaped help, arriving early, reinforcements from Fort Randall. But as they drew closer, she recognized the lead rider's silhouette, Lucas, coming back, which meant something had gone wrong. He rode into camp exhausted, his horse lathered and blown. Calla helped him down, gave him water, waited while he caught his breath. "Couldn't get through," he gasped. "Taggart had men watching the routes. They were waiting for us. Daniel went northeast, I went south like planned. But they had both. Routes covered. I got past the first checkpoint by pure luck. My horse stumbled and they thought I'd fallen. I circled back, tried 3 different approaches. They're all blocked. We can't get through." Calla felt something cold settle in her chest. "What about Daniel?" "Don't know. Lost sight of him hours ago. Maybe he made it through the northern route. Maybe. but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Judd had dragged himself over to listen. Taggart planned for this, probably sent riders ahead hours ago to set up blocking positions. Smart play. So we're on our own, Owen said quietly. No help coming. Daniel might have made it through, Calla insisted, but even she heard the doubt in her voice. And if he didn't? Samuel asked. What then? Silence. Around them, settlers listened, hope draining from exhausted faces. They'd survived the day's fighting, believing help was coming. Now that belief was shattered. Then we hold anyway, Calla said. We've got supplies for another few days. Ammunition, enough for maybe one more sustained defense, and we've already cut Taggart's force in half. If he attacks again with what he has left, we can break him completely. Or he breaks us, someone muttered. He won't, because we're fighting for something that matters, and his men are just following orders for money. When push comes to final shove, we'll stand, and they'll break. She didn't know if she believed it, but she said it with enough conviction that people wanted to believe it, and sometimes that was enough. Dawn brought the answer to whether Daniel had made it through. A single rider approached under white flag Voss again, looking as exhausted as Calla felt. He stopped at the usual position, waited for her to come forward. "We found your rider," he said without preamble. "The Morton boy. He's alive, barely. Took a bullet trying to force through our northern checkpoint. We've got him in our camp, and we're keeping him alive for now." Calla's stomach dropped. "If you hurt him, we haven't. Not beyond the bullet he already took. But Mr. Taggart wants you to understand your position. No help is coming. Your evidence isn't reaching any authorities. And you've got wounded people who need real medical care, not just field dressing." He paused. "We recovered the documents he was carrying. Interesting reading. Your husband was more thorough than Mr. Taggart realized. Then you know it's all true. Every fraud, every forged claim, every family he's swindled. I know it doesn't matter, because you're not getting it to anyone who can act on it." Voss's voice softened slightly. "Mrs. Vrenn, this is over. You fought well, made us pay a price we weren't expecting. But you've got no reinforcements, limited ammunition, and wounded people who might die without proper treatment. Taggart's offering final terms. You surrender the evidence, sign over any claim to this land, and everyone walks away. He'll even let you take your people east, away from his territory. And Daniel Morton, lives. We'll patch him up properly, send him with you. And if I refuse, then we attack at noon with everything we have left. No mercy, no quarter. We kill everyone who resists and burn this settlement to the ground. Mr. Taggart is done negotiating." Calla studied him carefully. "You don't like this, do you?" Voss's expression flickered. "What I like doesn't matter. I take orders. I follow through. That's the job. The job of helping a corrupt land agent destroy innocent families. The job of surviving in a territory where power matters more than right. You should understand that better than most, you've been alone up here for 6 years because you learned that lesson hard." He turned his horse slightly. "You've got until noon. Think carefully, Mrs. Vrenn. Those people depend on you. Don't let pride kill them." He rode away, leaving Calla standing in the snow, feeling the weight of 200 lives pressing down on her shoulders. She walked back to where the leadership waited: Owen, Samuel, Judd, Temperance. Their faces showed they'd heard enough to understand the situation. "What do we do?" Owen asked. Calla looked at the settlement, at the wounded resting in Temperance's care, at the families huddling together for warmth and comfort, at the defensive positions manned by exhausted people who'd already fought harder than anyone should have to, at the young pregnant woman, Daniel Morton's wife, waiting for a husband who might already be dead. "We hold," Calla said quietly, "because surrender means everything Henry documented gets destroyed. Means Taggart keeps operating, keeps swindling families, keeps destroying lives. Surrender means he wins not just here but everywhere, even if it means we all die?" Samuel asked. Even then, because some things matter more than survival. Standing witness matters. Making sure the truth is known matters. Making Taggart pay a price for his crimes matters, even if it's the only price he ever pays. That's asking a lot of people who just want to live, Owen said. I know, which is why I'm not ordering anyone to fight. If people want to surrender, want to take Taggart's deal, I won't stop them. But I'm not giving him those documents. Not destroying the last thing Henry left behind. Not letting 6 years of his work disappear because a criminal threatens violence. Temperance spoke up. You're not asking us to die for your husband's memory. You're asking us to stand for the principle that powerful men can't just destroy whoever they want. That's different. Is it? I'm not sure anymore. It is. Because if we roll over now, we're telling Taggart and everyone like him that threats and violence work, that ordinary people will always back down rather than risk everything. And I'm tired of backing down. She looked at the others. My Thomas died of fever because we couldn't afford real medicine. The doctor wanted payment up front, and we'd spent everything on land that turned out to be a lie, sold to us by men not much different from Taggart. I've been running from that memory for 8 years. I'm done running. Samuel nodded slowly. I taught history for 30 years, told students about people who stood up to tyrants, who fought for principles even when fighting seemed hopeless. Always wondered if I'd have that kind of courage when tested. Guess I'm about to find out. Owen was quiet for a long moment. Finally, we vote. Let everyone decide. That's only fair. They gathered the settlement, everyone who could walk. Calla laid out the situation honestly, no reinforcements coming, limited supplies, facing overwhelming force. Taggart's offer of surrender versus her decision to fight on. I won't order anyone to die for this, she said. Anyone who wants to accept Taggart's terms, go ahead. I'll understand. But I'm staying. I'm fighting. And I'm making sure those documents reach someone eventually, even if I have to die. Protecting them. The vote was nearly unanimous, 163, to stay and fight. 49, mostly families with small children, chose to accept surrender terms. Calla sent Owen with the 49 to Voss's camp. It took all her discipline not to judge them, not to see it as betrayal. They were just people trying to survive, trying to protect their children. That wasn't cowardice. It was love. But watching them go, seeing the remaining settlers close ranks behind their departure, Calla felt something shift. The ones who stayed weren't just settlers anymore. They were something else. Something forged in fire and desperation, and the decision to stand for principle over safety. When Owen returned, his face was grim. Voss says, noon still stands. Anyone staying is considered hostile. No quarter given. Fine. Calla checked her rifle, looked at the defensive positions one final time. Then we'd better make sure we're ready. The morning passed, in final preparations. Checking ammunition, reinforcing positions, saying whatever farewells needed, saying, Temperance organized the hospital area for mass casualties. The young pregnant woman insisted on taking a rifle position, said her baby deserved to be born into a world where people stood up to evil. At 1:45, Calla stood at the central defensive position, watching Voss's men form up for what everyone knew would be the final assault. No regrets? Judd asked beside her, his face pale with pain but his eyes clear. About 100. But not about this. Not about standing. Henry would be proud. Henry would probably tell me I'm being stubborn and stupid. But yeah, he'd be proud too. The sun reached its zenith. Down the trail, Voss gave an order. His remaining men, maybe 15 still combat-capable, began their advance. Calla raised her rifle. Around her, others did the same. The sound of weapons being readied, that mechanical prayer, asking for accuracy and survival one last time. Hold steady, she called. Make them earn it. And then from the east, a sound that shouldn't exist, a sound that changed everything. Bugles. Cavalry bugles, sharp and clear in the cold air. Calla spun, grabbed the field glasses, focused on the eastern trail. Blue uniforms. 2 columns of cavalry, riding hard, led by an officer carrying territorial colors. Behind them, wagons with medical supplies and support staff. And at the front, barely staying in the saddle but still upright, Daniel Morton, wounded, exhausted, but alive, and leading them straight to the settlement. "Hold fire!" Calla shouted. "Everyone hold fire!" The cavalry reached the settlement at full gallop, wheeling into position between Voss's advancing men and the defensive lines. The lead officer, a captain by his insignia, rode forward to meet Voss. "Stand down," he ordered. "I'm Captain William Thorne, Territorial Cavalry. These people are under federal protection pending. Investigation of fraud charges. Any hostile action against them will be considered an attack on United States forces." Voss pulled up short, clearly weighing his options. 15 men against 2 cavalry columns was suicide. He looked at Calla, looked at his remaining force, made his decision. "We're done here," he said, turned his horse, rode away, his men following. The battle was over. Just like that, finished by the arrival of legitimate authority and the courage of one wounded man who'd refused to quit. Calla lowered her rifle, feeling her legs suddenly weak. Around her, people were crying, laughing, embracing. She walked toward Daniel Morton, being lifted carefully from his horse by the cavalry medics. "You made it," she said. "Barely." He managed to smile despite obvious pain. "But I promised my wife I'd bring help. Couldn't let her down." His wife was already there, tears streaming, holding him carefully while the medics worked. Calla stepped back, gave them space, felt something finally release in her chest. They'd won, not through superior force or clever tactics, but through one man's determination and the belief that standing for what was right eventually mattered. Captain Thorne approached, saluted formally. "Mrs. Vrenn, I understand you have evidence of territorial fraud to present." "I do." She'd kept the documents on her person, not trusting them anywhere else. She handed them over carefully. "My husband gathered this before he died. Names, dates, forged claims. Everything you need to prove Marcus Taggart has been running a fraud operation for years." Thorne reviewed them quickly, his expression growing harder with each page. "This is extensive. I'll need formal statements from you and from the settlers. But based on what I'm seeing here, Taggart is finished. We'll have federal marshals on him within the week. What about Voss and his men? They scattered, but we know who they are now. They won't find legitimate work in the dispersed territories again." He looked at the settlement, at the wounded, at the evidence of hard fighting. "You held this position against overwhelming force. That's remarkable. We had no choice. Sometimes you hold because holding is all that's left. Nevertheless," he saluted again, "on behalf of the territorial government, thank you. People like you make this frontier worth protecting." After he left to organize his men, Calla stood quietly, watching the cavalry set up their camp, watching the medics treat wounded, watching normal order reassert itself after days of chaos. Samuel joined her. "We did it. We survived. That's not quite the same as winning." "It's close enough," he smiled. "What happens now?" Now, Calla looked at the settlers, at the families rebuilding after violence, at Temperance organizing the medical care with military efficiency, at the young pregnant woman holding her wounded husband. Now we finish what we started. Build this settlement properly. Make something worth the cost of defending it. 3 weeks later, winter had fully settled into the Dakota highlands, but the settlement that had been thrown together in desperation was transforming into something permanent. Proper cabins rising where tents had stood, storage structures for supplies, a community building where Samuel was already holding informal school sessions for the children. Calla stood at the same overlook where she'd spent 6 years looking inward, seeing only isolation and loss. Now, when she looked, she saw smoke from 40 hearths, heard voices and laughter, watched children playing in snow that no longer seemed quite so cold. Captain Thorne had returned twice more, bringing supplies and news. Marcus Taggart had been arrested in Cheyenne, facing multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The documents Henry had gathered were being used to investigate hundreds of suspicious land claims across 3 territories. Voss and most of his men had been caught, trying to cross into Canada. Daniel Morton had recovered fully, his wife now 8 months pregnant and counting days. The territorial government had formally recognized Calla's land claim and allocated additional parcels for the settlers who'd stayed. The settlement had a name now, Vrenn's Hope, though Calla had protested until she'd been outvoted by everyone who lived there. "You've got to stop fighting every honor they try to give you," Temperance said, climbing up to join her at the overlook. At some point over the past weeks, Temperance had become Calla's closest friend, the kind of relationship built on shared hardship and mutual respect. "I didn't do anything special, just refused to quit." That's what special means out here. Refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. Temperance handed her a cup of coffee, real coffee, from the supplies Captain Thorne had brought. "Owen asked me to tell you the expansion beam is ready. They want you there when they raise it." The messes. Expansion beam. A second central support for the community building, carved with dates and names of all the settler families. A symbol of continuity, of honoring the past while building the future. They walked back together, through a settlement that felt alive in ways Calla's solitary cabin never had. People called greetings, children ran past, chasing some game only they understood. A group of men were raising a roof beam on one of the new cabins, their voices coordinating effort through the cold air. At the community building, most of the settlement had gathered. The expansion beam lay ready, Henry's original beam already in place above. Someone had carved new words into the new beam: "Built by hope, held by courage, 1873. Owen stepped forward, speaking formally. "Mrs. Vrenn, this settlement exists because you refused to let powerful men destroy innocent people, because you stood when standing seemed impossible. We wanted to honor that honor you and Henry both by making this permanent, building something that lasts." Calla felt her throat tighten. She touched the new beam, running her fingers over the carved names. Every family, every person who'd stayed and fought and survived. "Henry would have liked this," she said quietly. "He always believed that building together mattered more than building alone." "So do we," Samuel said, "which is why we also voted unanimously this time to ask you to serve as the settlement's leader officially, not just in crisis, but permanent, to help us build this right." Calla looked at the faces around her. People she'd come to know, to care about, to trust. The young Morton couple, their baby due any day now. Samuel with his wisdom and gentle humor, Owen with his steady reliability, Temperance with her practical kindness. Dozens of others, all looking at her with something like hope. 6 years ago, leadership had felt like weight that crushed her. Responsibility had felt like punishment for failures she couldn't fix. But standing here, seeing what they'd built together, what they could still build, it felt different. It felt like purpose. "On one condition," she said. "We do this together. Not me leading and everyone following, but all of us building something none of us could build alone." "Agreed," Owen said, and the others nodded. They raised the beam together, dozens of hands guiding it into place, securing it with the same cooperation that had kept them alive through impossible odds. When it was set, fitting perfectly beside Henry's original beam, people cheered. That evening, Calla returned to her cabin, smaller now, since the expansion had created a real community center. But still hers. Still the place where everything had begun. She opened the box where she'd kept Henry's letters and documents, now returned to her after the military had copied everything for their investigation. The wedding band she'd sent out as identification sat on top. She picked it up, held it, in the lamplight. 6 years of wearing it like armor against the world. 6 years of letting it define her as someone who'd lost rather than someone who'd lived. Slowly, she slid it back onto her finger. Not as armor this time. As reminder of what she'd had, yes, but also of what she'd learned. That love meant building, not hiding. That Henry's gift hadn't been just the life they'd shared, but the capacity to build new life even after loss. A knock at the door. Judd Carroway, finally recovered from his wounds, leaning on a stick but walking on his own. "Thought you might want company," he said. "Or I can go if you'd rather be alone." Calla smiled. "Come in. I've been alone enough for one lifetime." They sat by the fire, drinking coffee, talking about small things and large ones. About the settlement's plans for spring, about Judd's intention to stay on as scout and protector, about the future that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. "You did good," Judd said eventually. "Henry would have been proud. Henry set this all in motion. The letter, the documents, the belief that I could still lead even after I'd convinced myself I couldn't. He gave you the push. You did the work." Through the window, Calla could see lights from the settlement, could hear, faintly, someone singing. A hymn, maybe, or just a simple song to pass the evening. "Sometimes the hardest thing about losing someone isn't the grief," she said quietly, echoing the words that had started this journey. "It's learning how to live alone, but I think I finally understand the real lesson isn't how to live alone, it's how to live again, how to let people in, even knowing you might lose them. How to build even knowing things break, how to lead even knowing you might fail." "And have you," Judd asked, "learned that lesson?" Calla looked at the ring on her finger, at the firelight making it glow, looked through the window at the settlement beyond, thought about the journey from isolation to community, from grief to purpose, from hiding to standing. "I'm learning," she said. "Every day, I'm learning." Outside, the mountain stood silent and strong, sheltering not just one grieving woman anymore, but a whole community of people building hope from hardship. The Dakota winter pressed close, but inside there was warmth, inside there was life. And inside Calla Vrenn's chest, for the first time in 6 years, there was something more than just survival. There was the quiet joy of knowing that Henry's last gift, his belief that she could live again, could lead again, could love again, had finally taken root. The settlement would grow. Children would be born. New families would join. Seasons would pass, and challenges would come. But they'd face it all together, building on the foundation that 200 desperate people and one reluctant leader had created in the highlands. Legacy, Calla understood now, wasn't what you held on to. It was what you passed forward, what you built that outlasted you, what you gave to others so they could build something even better. Henry had given her that. And now, finally, she was ready to give it forward. She stood, walked to the door, looked out at the growing darkness and the lights of home scattered across the mountain she'd once thought would be her prison. "Tomorrow," she said to Judd, to herself, to Henry's memory, "we start building the school. Samuel says 20 children need proper education, and he's right. After that, maybe a church, or a meeting hall, or whatever this settlement needs to become something that lasts. Sounds like you've got plans." "I've got purpose. That's better than plans. That's enough." She turned back to the warmth of the fire, to the company of a friend, to the life that had somehow, impossibly, grown from the ashes of the one she'd lost. Outside, the mountain wind sang its endless song, but inside, there was laughter and hope, and the simple, profound joy of building something worth defending. Calla Vrenn had saved a wounded traveller. 200 settlers had arrived at her door. And in choosing to stand rather than hide, in choosing to lead rather than retreat, in choosing to trust that building together mattered more than surviving alone, she'd saved herself too. The story of the mountain woman had ended. The story of Vrenn's hope was just beginning.